Welcome back to the Centered on Buffalo podcast. We are joined by current Bills radio play-by-play man, host of One Bills Live, host of the Bills by the Numbers podcast, and Buffalo Bills insider Chris Brown. Welcome to the show, brother.
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
Thanks
for including all of that. You didn't need to do that, but thank you.
Yeah, you're carrying a lot of titles these days. Well, let's start here, though. How's it feel? And what's it mean to you to be officially named the permanent play-by-play man for the Buffalo Bills radio and to be the voice of the Bills?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, certainly a little bit of relief at first, but now as we're getting closer to the preseason, it's kind of sinking in that, the games are coming. So kind of getting excited now. So as I'm sure you are. So yeah. And look, I was fortunate enough to work with Van and Murph. So I kind of know the standard that and responsibility this position carries. So that is not lost on me at all. So yeah, pretty privileged and honored to be in this seat as well.
To your knowledge, is it the same around the NFL where the play-by-play guys have been in such high regard around town as Murph and Van Miller have been? I mean, when I first got to Buffalo, one of the first people I heard about was John Murphy. The first time I filmed something up in the broadcast area, you see the shrine to Van Miller. To your knowledge, is that common around the league?
I would say there are probably a few examples of that around the league. Merrill Reese comes to mind in Philadelphia, who just won the Pete Rozelle Award this year and is going to be honored Hall of Fame weekend. And then Van Miller is another one who got the Pete Rozelle Award, along with Pittsburgh's Myron Cope, who probably has that kind of cachet as well. Those are the only three NFL play-by-play broadcasters to be honored with the Pete Rozelle Award. There's obviously a ton of other people in NFL media over the years that have been given that honor as well. But those are the only three radio play-by-play broadcasters. So those would probably be the three that come to mind that would fit into that category.
Let's take a minute to hear from one of our sponsors. That's Dan-O Seasoning. They have the best line of seasonings out there on the market, all natural ingredients. Two of my favorites. Number one, the Primo, the best steak seasoning on the market. Number two, the Crunchy. It's like everything bagel seasoning, only better. Check out the link in the bio to order you some today or go to the website, danoseasoning.com. You got a little break from training camp. I see you're back at your house. Have you been living in the dorms?
No, I've been kind of going back and forth because training camp for me is actually a little easier than it used to be. Like back when you were playing, I don't have to tell you this, but there were still two-a-days.
Right.
You still had legitimate two-a-day practices. The media could cover both of them. And so that essentially doubled my workload from what it is now. And I was doing everything left, right, and center on the website. It's funny. I talked to, our department head, Jeff Matthews, who I know you know well, and we kind of joke about it now because 10, 12 years ago, our media and content department was me, him, and one other guy.
Wow.
And we did pretty close to the same amount of content that upwards of 20 people do now. We worked like dogs. It was insane.
Yeah. All right. So back when we switched from two-a-days to one-a-days, I always said that not that it was easier when you had two-a-days, but they could never make the practice as intense when you have 2 in 1 day. And it almost made that single practice that much harder than the single practice that you almost wish you could go back. And I don't say that, but I don't truly mean that. But the first few times we had, that extended practice where they could really beat you down, they could, give you a night practice the next night. So almost give you 36 hours off. Did you guys notice that at all, that those practices did get more intense when you could only have one a day?
Maybe it's because I wasn't necessarily looking for it. You as a former player feel it. So it would probably register in your consciousness much more than me. I'm usually just trying to keep track of who's with first team, second team, third team, who's making good plays, things like that, who's moving up the depth chart. I think I'm just looking for different things than you were probably feeling.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Something I know you have been looking for lately is how Josh Allen's doing. And so much was made this offseason of how is he going to perform this season without, Stephon Diggs on the outside, without Gabe Davis. And you only have Khalil Shakir. That's the only guy he's completed a pass to at the receiver position. But from all I've heard and then seen with just clips, I understand that, and highlights, this may be his sharpest start to a training camp to date. Is that what you've seen out there?
I will say the thing that I was pleasantly surprised to see at the outset of camp was how sharp the timing of the passing game was right from the beginning. First day of practice, they're operating in low red zone. And granted, the routes are shorter, so the accuracy should be better. But to your point, a whole new slew of guys that he's throwing to, and the timing with players like Samuel and Coleman and Hollins, who are probably locks to be in that top four with Shakir going into the regular season. I was pretty impressed with the timing and accuracy of the passing game early. I would say the only day through the first five where it may have taken a little bit of a dip was probably day three, which was that first Saturday of training camp. And I think it was partially a byproduct of Josh's arm getting a little tired. We're getting to the back half of day three. He's already thrown hundreds of passes. And I felt like that's where it took a little bit of a dip. But beyond that, it's been pretty consistent.
Yeah, that's great to hear because generally at the start of camp, the defense is ahead because the offense needs to get their timing. One guy on defense can make a play and make up for a lot of others that may not be doing their job correctly on the play. On the offensive side of the ball, you generally need all 11 guys or close to it to be on the same page and doing their job to have a successful play. So it was great to see that they were coming out strong. And I say that mainly because there's just so many new faces, especially on the outside. Has there been anyone, you mentioned the guys who you feel like are pretty much locks to make this team at the receiver
Yeah.
position, but besides Shakir, has anyone stood out in particular to you?
Well, I mean, Coleman has made plays every day. I think Samuel has flashed at least once a day as well. I think Holland's skill set is more diverse than he's given credit for. And so that's why I feel good about that group. Beyond them, I would say Shavers, who was on the practice squad last year as a rookie out of San Diego State, or is it Fresno? I always mix him up with Brian Thompson. In any event, Shavers, I think, has done the most of that secondary group. So if you want to say the other 9 receivers are battling for spots 5 and 6, I would put Shavers at the top of that group right now, through the first week of camp, because he's done the most in terms of flashing for those of us that are watching. And then second, he's been the most consistent through that first week. And I got to tell you this, and we don't hear this often from Sean McDermott, but he was asked specifically about Shavers.
I heard it
And
too.
he was speaking glowingly. And what he appreciates most about his game is the consistency. And, Eric, being a former player, I have to tell you this, but the number one thing that coaches want in a player is the ability to trust them out on the field. And if he has demonstrated that level of consistency already to the head coach, that probably puts him in a good spot going into preseason games.
Yeah, it's going to be fun for us calling these preseason games. I feel like this year in particular, there's more position battles, maybe not for those starting spots, but there's a lot of open spots kind of on the back end, who's going to
Mm-hmm.
be, at the back end of the offensive line, the back end of the receivers, corners, linebackers. We're going to have a lot of
Yep.
good stuff to talk about. So we'll leave it at that as a receiver position. So we have something to talk about when it comes to preseason games, but it will be fun to see who makes those plays in the preseason games and actually steps up and separates themselves. When the lights come on, you're playing against another opponent. Many think Dalton Kincade could lead the team in catches this year, though. Is that what it's indicating here at the start of camp? I'm seeing a lot of plays being made by him at the start.
Yeah, he's been pretty special. I do expect him to be the top target / reception guy. I don't know if he's going to lead in receiving yards, but I think in terms of targets and receptions come the end of the year, provided he stays healthy, I think he will be the number one. It's so funny because you got all these people like, well, the Bills don't have a number one alpha dog receiver. I was like, you're looking at the wrong position.
Right.
You got to look at the tight end position because that's probably who the guy is going to be. It's probably going to be Kincaid. And over the weekend, I was out there at practice, and without having any show duties, I really kind of had the opportunity to kind of sink my teeth into practice. And I don't know what it is about his route running, but he just knows instinctively as soon as he has a guy defender that's on him turned, and he immediately reacts to that. And that's where that separation comes all the time. And, he leaves guys looking the opposite direction, and he's already catching the football. and his hands are so soft, you don't even hear the football hit his hands. And Josh, as we know, throws with a lot of velocity. So I think that's saying something too. I just think he's really poised to be kind of the leading guy on this roster. Because if you think about it, Eric, and I know we'll discuss this during the season when we're doing games, if you have to think about opposing defenses, and it's like, well, who are they really going to game plan for, obviously, besides Josh? And to me, it's Kincaid right now. Hopefully, somebody else emerges and forces defense to think twice. But right now, going into the season, I think he's the guy that's going to be getting the brackets and the double teams and stuff like that in the middle of the field.
And that's potentially why you go get a guy with some speed like Curtis Samuel, because if now you're going to roll down a safety and it's not that two shell anymore because you don't want your linebackers covering Kincaid, he's too big for your nickel. So now, okay, now your safety comes down. Now we can take the top off the defense. Well, you go and get a guy like Coleman, you get a guy like Curtis Samuel. Hopefully they can take the top off the defense at a more consistent rate than we've seen these last few years from a really strong Bills receiving core, but just lacked the ability to make plays down the field at times. So hopefully that comes to fruition there. And then your point on Dalton Kincade and seeing when he gets a guy turned, I feel like Travis Kelce does that better than anyone. And you're starting to see that from Kincaid as well. Now, when I had Chad Henne on my podcast, he talked about how Kelce has more freedom to just freelance out there at times where guys are kind of running routes to get out of his way. And Mahomes is going to Kelce. And if it's zone coverage, he's going to find the open zone. Mahomes has so much, comfort with him. And I think you'll see that at times, it'll be in the form of an option route or whatever. They probably won't call it. Joe Brady probably won't call it the Kincaid special this year, but you'll likely have a lot of option routes where Josh can just feel Kincaid. Okay, he's going to sit here. Boom, the ball's on him. There's your 8 yards on 2nd and 10, get you that 3rd and 2 that we're always talking about on the broadcast. That's so valuable throughout the flow of a game.
Yeah. And I would just say real quick about that, like I hearken back to what Brandon Beane said 2 years ago when they drafted Kincaid, and he likened him to Cole Beasley, obviously a different position player, but with the same intent in mind within the scope of the passing game. Because I think if you go all the way back to 2020, the Bills' offense really hasn't truly replicated that to its fullest in terms of controlling the middle of the field with an easy button answer target like Beasley was in 2020 for Josh. And that was his highest efficiency season, 69% completion, passer rating like somewhere around 107 or something. So I think they've been working to get back to that. And I think Kincaid might be the guy that can truly open up the middle of the field the way Beasley used to, just probably in a little bit different way.
Yep, you're exactly right. All right, the Bills have different coordinators on both sides of the football. Have you noticed anything different schematically through the start of training camp where it looks drastically different? I know that Bobby Babich is going to run, even if he's calling the plays, it'll be essentially Sean McDermott's scheme.
Yeah.
But there's different personnel each year and different personnel, especially on the back end of the defense. Have you noticed anything schematically on either side that's drastically different?
Yeah, I think it's early for the defense because, and here was one thing that I noticed the first 2 days, just watching the defense with all the new pieces. It was startling to me anyway, how quiet it was out there. I think some guys, particularly, and I'm talking secondary strictly here. Yes, you hear Bernard making calls and checks and stuff like that, but I'm talking on the back end where we've been so accustomed to hearing Hyde and Poyer just chirping pre-snap the whole time, and that was starkly absent. And I think I don't think it's because anybody's unwilling to do it. I think it's more because guys don't know what their roles are going to be yet. And so I think sometimes guys that are comfortable being vocal are hesitant to be vocal because they don't know I'm the guy yet. I'm thinking that's part of the equation there. And so I think that's part of the reason we haven't really been able to get a bead on, well, is it really going to be that much different? I can't imagine that it is on the defensive side of the ball. On offense, yes, I think it will be. I know you had Josh on your podcast here. We had Josh on our daily show, me and Steve. And I asked him, I said, look, I don't need specifics, but can you quantify how much of the offense is different with Brady at the controls? And he said, man, he goes, it's hard to put a percentage on it. But he said there is a significant amount of stuff that will be different within the scheme. And one of the things he kept mentioning when he was talking to us were clear outs. And I think, Eric, without an alpha dog number one receiver, you have to rely on Brady more to scheme things for guys to give them opportunities to make plays if they can't beat anybody on any given week, no matter the scheme, no matter the call, no matter the defender. And so I think Brady has taken that upon himself to put those elements into the scheme so guys that might not be a skill set level of Diggs can still execute and make plays for this offense. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Yeah.
It does completely. And I heard Josh talk about that in the spring. And look, Josh has taken 0 shots on Stephon Diggs or Gabe Davis or anybody. He does a great job of giving those guys tremendous credit for his career. I thought the one slight, no pun intended, dig that he made on those guys and Stephon in particular was he said, we have guys willing to run a clear out route at full speed to make sure that the other guy gets open. And look, this could be me reading too much into it, but I felt like that was Josh's just one slight he took and indirectly, and it wasn't a serious diss on those guys, but that was evident to me that when he says something, Josh is extremely smart and he's extremely calculated what he says in the media. He said that in the spring, and it instantly told me that he's excited about how willing these guys are to get each other open, which may have not always been the case.
And he's making a point of emphasizing it with the guys on this roster this year, because when he was on with us, Steve had asked him about a touchdown he threw on a post pattern or a deep over to Samuel, I want to say. And he said, I didn't go run down the field and congratulate Samuel. He's like, I went to Mac Hollins and Valdez Scantling, who both ran clear outs on the route to leave the middle of the field open for him. I'm high-fiving those guys 50 yards down the field because they made that play possible. And I'm just like, okay, we know what's going to be emphasized here. Team football, like going forward. And he's going to be patting the guys on the rear end and high-fiving the guys that are running the clear outs for the betterment of the greater good of the passing game.
Yep, that says a whole lot. Let's give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Prime. They got new drink collaborations with Kevin Durant, Aaron Judge. Chris, I know you're a big Yankees guy. We'll have to get you some to the house. Those are both great. They're big favorites in our household. All right, switching gears a touch. I want to know, how difficult is it for you? And look, I need to know the rosters too, but I don't have to spit out names at the extremely fast rate that you do as you're calling the plays. How tough is it in the preseason with 90-man rosters to get ready for those games?
Yeah, somebody recently asked me what's the hardest part of your job, and I said preseason games.
Yeah.
And they said, why? And I said, because I need to know 180 names, not 106, which is, what you're usually looking at in the regular season. And look, this isn't everybody's process because every play-by-play broadcaster has a different process. It's my preference to memorize both rosters in my head because I feel it enables me to call a smoother game because I'm not taking my eyes off the field and looking down at my card to identify the player. I already know the player because it's in my head. That's just the way I like to go into a game because I feel I can call it smoother. But yeah, it's a challenge. And I'm not looking forward to Chicago again because the names that give me the most trouble are the names of Nigerian descent, because I don't have any problem with the Polynesian names because the rule with Polynesian names is you sound out every vowel and it's consistent no matter what the name is. And I found with Nigerian names that is not always the case. It is not a tried and true way to treat all vowels. And maybe it's the African dialects that lead to the different pronunciations. But I'm telling you right now, I go right to the source if I can and ask the player. Like on our roster today, I talked to David Ugwebu. That's how he wants to say his last name. Now, if you look at how it's spelled, it doesn't look like that. But I wrote it down today and I spoke to him. I was like, look, I'm the radio play-by-play broadcaster. I just want to make sure I pronounce your last name properly. I said, tell me how to phonetically say it. And he said, Ugwebu. And then we even wrote down together how to phonetically write that so I don't mess it up.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That makes a lot of sense to me. All right, so beyond the preseason, as you get into the regular season games and it went through the full slate last year, was there any part of the job that was more difficult on a week-to-week basis than you had had imagined it to be.
I don't know that it was any more difficult. I will say that it's always a going back to when I was doing play by play, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, wow, you did a good job and, with Eric and everything. And, for doing that for the first, I'm like, well, it's not the first time I've done it. I got like 13, 14 years of play by play experience under my belt. It was just a little bit in the past because my current job was too demanding to still balance that out on the side.
Yeah, that's the
Uh,
classic overnight success syndrome. Everyone just
yeah.
assumes that's your first call.
Right, but I can safely say that I did not have nearly the sponsorship reads that we do for the Bills radio broadcast. So, and fortunately, Greg Harvey is great at just dropping those cards over my shoulder to read at the appropriate time, as I know he does for you too. And because of that, that made it easier. But the volume of them, I'm not saying it was difficult, but it was surprising the volume of reads that we do have through the course of a broadcast. And so, you do have to develop a feel for that. And just because your producer hands you a card doesn't mean you should always wedge it in there in that given moment. Sometimes wait a play so you can not only not rush through the read and give the sponsor their proper time, but also make it feel like it's just a natural flow of the call of the game as well. Because you don't want to be zipping through and ticking off a car dealership or some other sponsor. You want to do right by them as well because they're paying to be in our broadcast to begin with.
Yeah, I was surprised as well how many reads there were through a game, which is a sign of how good the Bills are now that there wants to be there that many sponsors throughout the broadcast. That helps our salaries, I would imagine, as well. It would be interesting, and I don't know that people would want to see this on a week to week basis, and people may not care about this much as I think they do. But I think it would be pretty cool if people got to see us in action throughout the game and how much goes into it. Like we're not on TV, so we're not maybe drawing on a teleprompter, but how many cards and when they're pointing for you and we have a spotter in between us and you have Mike Mullane down on the other side of you, there's a lot going on in that booth that where I feel like maybe at least once people would enjoy kind of seeing the back end of that process. They might not want to see the back of my ugly head the entire game as we talked about with Murph last week on One Bills Live. I'm covering up a lot of the view from behind us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, well, your view is a little bit better than my shiny dome. So I'll just say that my wife wanted to see how things functioned last year when I was doing the games with you, and she popped in the second half just to kind of sit in the back row and put the headsets on for 10 minutes just to kind of see everything. And she told me when I got home after the game, she said, there is no way anybody who is not in the radio broadcasting business would even think for a second that there is that much activity going on and that it's more than just Eric, Chris, and a producer or an engineer. There are all these different moving parts going on at the same time. So yeah, it is kind of a look behind the curtain when they come sit in the booth, because there are times with all the gesticulating and arms and hands and people passing things off that, it kind of looks like a gesturized Grand Central Station.
And then I'm sitting up in the front texting people from Highmark to maybe get us some special food delivered and having buddies
You're
meet
always
us.
working that, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's amazing what a tweet to the Highmark staff will do to get us some pretty good food during the playoffs. That was pretty fun. All right, give me a breakout candidate on either side of the ball for the Bills this year.
Okay, breakout candidate. I really want to believe in Kyer Elam this year,
Mm.
based on what I thought the deck had been cleared for him. I don't think it's any secret at this point in time that John Butler, the former secondary coach, and he did not always see eye to eye, and I don't think it was because anybody was a bad actor in that equation. I just think it was personal preference for the coach, and the player found it hard to get in his good graces despite his best efforts. So now we move forward for Elam with a new cornerbacks coach, and I watched it today. One-on-ones, receivers against corners, and Jamiel Adai, the new cornerbacks coach, is 5 feet away from Elam on the field, just talking him through that rep. And Elam played it perfectly, had the leverage to win, and then didn't do the 8th step out of 8 steps on reading that route and playing it in man coverage accordingly. And because he didn't do the last thing out of those 8 things that he had to do, he gave the receiver an inch and he made the reception. And so Adai immediately takes him off to the sidelines while the next guy goes, and he's telling him, you did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 correctly, but you didn't do 8. And when you have that guy in that spot, do 8, it will work. So he comes out, does the next rep, and he does all 8 things correctly. The receiver just makes an extraordinary catch on the play. But Elam, because he did that 8th part of the technique, is able to turn his body in midair and literally rip the ball out of the receiver's hands before he hits the ground and makes what would qualify as an interception. A very unconventional one, but I think that's just a small example about Elam's skill set gives him the potential to be spectacular physically in Buffalo's secondary. The question now is, can he be spectacular and consistent? And that's, I think, his challenge through the course of this preseason. If he can do that, he's my pick on defense. On offense, I mean, everybody's saying this. I really feel Shakir can pop off this year and really have a super productive season. But I will say somebody that surprised me even more, and it's in a way that most people wouldn't expect. I really think that Keon Coleman's football IQ is a lot higher than people are giving him credit
Yep.
for.
Yep.
I saw a piece with him on video with a former Steelers defensive back that's going to slip my mind, but just listening to him talk through routes when he ran against him just in a little workout session, and then hearing him talk about the game here at training camp, it's very evident to me that he already understands very quickly in a route how to identify what the coverage is, number one, and how the DB is playing him, number two, and third, how quickly he has an answer for whatever those two things are at the beginning of that equation. He very quickly goes A plus B, okay, I'm giving him C. And very often it's a good answer to make a play. And for somebody to be that advanced mentally at that position with the amount of pressure he's probably going to have on his plate sooner rather than later, I'm very encouraged about what he's going to be able to give them early in his career of his rookie season.
I still got a bunch of buddies that work with the ACC network, and they raved about that kid. Now, they said he's going to be funny. He's going to, give you a lot of entertainment in Buffalo, but they also said, wait till you get this guy, because they had him in production meetings when they covered Florida State games. They said, this kid is smart. You are going to love this kid in Buffalo. I think he's going to be a star. So that doesn't surprise me that he's turning some heads early in training camp. And look, I've gotten to know Kaiir Elam a little bit. Comes to my charity events in Buffalo. Just gotten to speak with him a few times, and I am rooting hard for him. This is a guy that didn't have early success, and because of that, beat himself down a little bit. Obviously, got beat down by the coaches a little bit on the defense side of the football. Well, look, it's only year 3 for him. He's still incredibly young. What is he, 23 years old? I came to the league at 23 years old. And so for me, I'm excited about what this kid's prospects could be if you just get him a little confidence. I want him to have an incredible preseason and be able to step on the field with some confidence. And I think we might have seen that towards the end of last season. He had to fill in some in that Pittsburgh game, played well. And so hopefully he can have a nice start to this 2024 season. All right, last one for me. This is national. I've read, and look, it's national something like every single day. But today, where we're recording this, is National Buffalo Wing Day. Are you a big Buffalo wing guy?
I mean, I eat a fair amount. I would not say that I am super brand loyal.
Because you're more of an Italian guy, right?
Yeah, well, I grew up in an Italian household because my mom's 100% Italian. The other half is Irish and Swiss, which just, I'm sorry, they don't measure up food-wise, ethnicity-wise speaking. But yes, and my wife's 100% Italian too. So, I kind of kept it on going down the line there. We joke all the time. My kids are more Italian than I am because they're 3/4. But anyway, I would say more often than not, we are pretty happy playing it pretty simple as a family because we usually just go regular wings, medium. We don't get into all the gourmet different kinds. I mean, my wife's born and bred in Buffalo, so for her, it's usually just straight wings because her family never really got fancy. And probably back in the 80s and 90s, you didn't have all the options that you do now at the various
Right.
establishments around Buffalo with people trying to take it to the next level and everything. And we're usually happy with those. I will say our household is proud Buffalonian household. We will never do boneless wings. That's just stupid and never happens. And I would say our family is split pretty much on flats and drums in terms of preference. I don't know why. I'm just a drum guy. Like, I know a lot of people like flats, but I'm a drum guy just because I like that big honking chunk of meat at the end and just gnawing on that thing. And plus, I think a drum is easier to eat with one hand. So if you're like eating on the run and stuff, you could literally just do 10 drums with one hand and only one hand's getting disgusting, in need of like 10 napkins while you can have the other hand free. One of my college teammates who's from Buffalo taught me that and said, dude, you don't have to get this messy with wings. You can just eat them with one hand. I was like, what? And he goes, stick to the drums. You can eat with one hand and be clean as a whistle with the other hand.
I'll have to teach you my technique to eat a flat one-handed. Just push down the one end.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna need that.
Yeah, slip it off. But
Oh, you're doing the pull out?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you
Yeah,
could do it.
yeah, you can do that. I get too much chicken stuck in my teeth when I do that though. That's my like when I do the strain, like the strip technique, I get a lot in my teeth, and then I'm just picking it for like I need like 4 toothpicks to get it all out.
Well, until I got my teeth redone, I couldn't get food in my teeth. You could just go like that when my teeth were all spread out. So maybe that's more of an issue nowadays. I just haven't noticed as much. All right, I lied. Last one for me. I'm gonna let you roast me on my own podcast. What's one area that I need to improve on for this season in the broadcast booth from your end?
Oh, come on. We already talked on the phone about this.
I know. I'm letting you do
No,
it again.
I think, yeah, I mean, no, I think we're good because, like I was telling you when we had that phone conversation, the thing that shocked me the most when we first started doing games, which unfortunately was the DeMar Hamlin game of all games, but when we went through those first 4 games, I was already preparing myself for me to step on you and for you to step on me just by virtue of the fact that we hadn't worked together on game broadcasts ever before. And when we got to the end of that 22 season with the loss to Cincinnati in the divisional playoff, when I was driving home from that game and the season was over, I was just kind of thinking through all the mechanics of what we had done just in those 4 games alone. And I was just saying to myself, I can't think of more than 2 or 3 times in 4 games that we stepped on each other. Like you stayed out of my way until you knew I was done with the call, and I tried to stay out of your way until I knew you were done describing the what, the why, or the how something happened on the field. And that was something that I really marveled at because in previous, engagements with doing games with some other people over the years, that was a heavy lift at the
Mm-hmm.
outset of working with somebody. So the fact that that didn't happen for us in our first 4 games left me very encouraged when I found out that I was going to have to be an interim for the whole 2023 season for Murph as well. So I flipped the question on you. I know I didn't answer it. That left me encouraged going forward.
Yeah, yeah, we had good chemistry from the start, but it's easy to work with a pro. I'll say that. So, Chris, I'm looking forward to a fun season. Enjoy the rest of this training camp coverage, and I look forward to seeing you about a week for that first preseason game.
Yeah, I'm pumped and hoping we have a lot of exciting stuff to call through the course of the season for sure and the postseason.
I think we will. Let's have some fun.